My dear brothers and sisters, we gather here not in the comfort of silence, but in the roaring call of conscience. We are not here to bask in the sunshine of approval, but to wrestle with the storms of justice. I come before you today, not from a pulpit nor a podium of power, but from the depths of a jail cell in Birmingham, a narrow place where hope was pressed against the bars of injustice, and yet faith refused to die. For there are moments when waiting becomes a form of betrayal, when silence echoes louder than violence, and when the Church of Justice must rise louder than the whispers of moderation. I write, I speak, I stand, because the time is always ripe to do what is right, and the soul of a nation cannot breathe freely until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That is not merely a phrase to be admired. It is a warning, a declaration, a trumpet sounding through the corridors of history. When injustice breathes in a back alley of Birmingham, the conscience of New York is shaken. When a child is denied her right to education in Mississippi, the dreams of a child in California are diminished. We are tied together in a single garment of destiny, wrapped in an inescapable network of mutuality, and what touches one directly touches all indirectly. Too often we have imagined that we could remain untouched by suffering, that we could insulate ourselves from the cries of the oppressed, but the blood of the innocent does not respect the borders we draw. The tears of a mother whose son is gunned down in hate do not stop flowing because her grief is distant from our doorstep. Oppression may begin in the shadows, but it casts a long and reaching darkness. There comes a time when people of conscience must awaken to the interconnection of all struggles, when we must realize that to remain neutral in the face of injustice is to take the side of the oppressor. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and justice is only as real as it is universal. You cannot lift the whole without lifting every part. You cannot cleanse the nation of evil if you turn a blind eye to a single act of evil. The suffering of the marginalized is not a side issue. It is the center of the moral struggle. If we allow any community, any race, any child, any family to be crushed under the weight of indifference or discrimination, we are planting seeds of destruction in our own backyard. The poison of inequality will not stay contained. It seeps through the soil, it infects the air, it taints the water of democracy. Too often, those in comfort have been lulled to sleep by the narcotic of distance. That's not my town, they say. That's not my child, they whisper. But the truth is that the walls we build to keep out the pain of others will one day become our own prison. Justice must not be limited by geography. The fight for human dignity cannot be bound by zip codes or state lines. Every time we raise our voice for someone else's freedom, we strengthen our own. Every time we kneel beside the broken-hearted, we rise a little higher in the light of truth. And every time we say that injustice will not stand, not there, not here, not anywhere, we are declaring our loyalty to something higher than law, deeper than tradition, stronger than fear. It is not enough to be saddened by stories on the news. It is not enough to post messages of solidarity. It is not enough to shake our heads and move on. We must recognize that the fight for justice is a shared burden, that the freedom of one man or woman is bound to the freedom of us all. We must learn to see every act of injustice as a dagger aimed at the heart of democracy, every act of silence as a betrayal of the promise of equality. The fierce urgency of now is not a poetic phrase. not a fleeting sentiment, but a moral imperative that presses against the conscience of humanity. There comes a time when waiting becomes a form of complicity, when the clock does not merely measure time, but counts the cost of delay. We have been told over and over again to wait for a more convenient season, to wait until tempers cool, to wait until society is more prepared to accept change. But the time has come to declare that wait has almost always meant never. The time has come to recognize that justice too long delayed is justice denied. Every day we wait, a child is turned away from a decent education, a family is torn apart by poverty, a soul is crushed under the weight of silent oppression. Delay is not neutrality, it is a silent accomplice of injustice. We are living in a time that demands action, a time that does not grant us the luxury of hesitation. The wind of change is blowing, the cries of the unheard are rising, and the tide of conscience is swelling. This moment is not asking for polite patience or cautious negotiation. It is demanding bold steps, courageous hearts, and unwavering resolve. The status quo is not sacred. Tradition is not a shield for injustice. Laws are not holy if they crush the dignity of human beings, and order without justice is nothing but organized cruelty. The fierce urgency of now calls upon us to move, not tomorrow, not after the next election, not after another commission, but now. Because real lives are at stake, because souls are breaking, because the dreams of generations cannot be endlessly postponed, there is a tendency among the comfortable to believe that time alone brings progress. But time is neutral. It can be used for good or for evil. It is not the mere passing of years that heals wounds, but the moral determination of people who choose to act. It is not the calendar that sets us free. It is courage in the face of resistance, and truth in the face of denial. The fierce urgency of now reminds us that history is not written by those who wait, but by those who rise. We must refuse the tranquilizing drug of gradualism and embrace the hard, often uncomfortable truth that justice demands immediacy. The heartbeat of the oppressed cannot beat in sync with the slow ticking of a hesitant society. Their pain is not delayed, their wounds are not paused, their struggle is happening in real time. Let us not mistake politeness for peace or order for justice. The comfort of the few must never outweigh the rights of the many. The fierce urgency of now is a cry from the depths of every man, woman, and child who has waited too long, suffered too deeply, and been silenced too often. It is a cry that shakes the foundations of complacency and calls forth the better angels of our nature. This is the hour to move, the moment to stand, the season to build, to confront, to march, to love with the strength of our conviction and the fire of our commitment. There is a power greater than violence, deeper than fear, and more transformative than rage. It is the force of nonviolent resistance. In a world bruised by the clenched fist and the burning torch, it takes extraordinary strength to respond with open hands and unwavering love. But nonviolence is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is not retreat from struggle. It is the bold decision to fight oppression without becoming an oppressor, to confront evil without mirroring its hate. When the heart chooses love in the face of hatred, it does something that weapons never can. It changes the moral landscape. It disrupts the cycle of revenge. It exposes injustice, not through destruction, but by the sheer brilliance of righteousness. This is the creative tension we must embrace, not as an accident of conflict, but as a strategy for awakening the sleeping conscience of the world. Nonviolent resistance creates a kind of sacred discomfort. It doesn't destroy buildings, it shakes souls. It doesn't strike with fists, it strikes at the system that holds those fists in place. And though it may not bring victory overnight, it births transformation that lasts generations. It breaks chains that violence can never touch. The chains of hatred, the prison of indifference, the fortress of ignorance. It says to the oppressor, "You may jail my body, but you cannot imprison my truth. You may threaten my life, but you cannot kill my dignity." Through peaceful protest, through moral confrontation, through the courage to stand unarmed before the armed agents of oppression, nonviolence becomes a weapon of the spirit, one that does not wound the soul of the one who wields it. There will always be those who say, "Why not fight fire with fire?" But the answer is written in the ashes of every burned city and the brokenness of every wounded heart. Violence breeds more violence, and hatred feeds itself until it consumes all in its path. But creative tension, born of nonviolent struggle, is a tension that builds rather than breaks. It challenges systems, not people. It confronts evil, not out of revenge, but out of a deep commitment to justice. It does not destroy the enemy, it transforms him. It calls out not only for freedom, but for reconciliation, not only for rights, but for redemption. It is the language of the soul, speaking to what is human even in those who seem inhumane. This creative tension is what moves a nation. It is what forces cities to listen, what turns the tide of law, what shapes the headlines and pierces the silence. It is not easy, it is not safe, but it is holy. It is the path walked by prophets and pioneers, by those who refuse to hate even when hated, who refuse to give in even when beaten down. It is what gives a protest its power, what gives a jail cell its dignity, what gives the struggle its soul. And when it rises up through the streets, through the songs, through the steadfast steps of peaceful warriors, it declares to the world that change is coming, not by sword, not by fire, but by truth wrapped in love and courage, armed with faith. There is a deep and dangerous myth that has lingered through the ages, a myth that progress will come not through the boldness of justice, but through the caution of moderation. It is not the open racist that most threatens the march toward equality. It is the white moderate who says, "I agree with your cause, but not your methods." The one who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, over a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. These are the voices that tell the oppressed to wait for a better time, to accept gradualism in the face of emergency, to value order more than truth. And in doing so, they become an obstacle greater than the outright enemy, for they wear the mask of friendship while denying the urgency of freedom. The white moderate is not fueled by hate, but by fear. Fear of disruption, fear of confrontation, fear of losing comfort in the pursuit of justice. It is this very mindset that has allowed injustice to thrive in the shadows, hidden behind polite silence and noble, sounding restraint. When the moderate prioritizes civility over change, quiet over courage, they become gatekeepers of the status quo. They do not burn crosses, but they vote for policies that perpetuate inequality. They do not shout slurs, but they silence the voices crying out for liberation. And in their hesitation, in their clinging to comfort, they delay the dreams of generations. They suggest that movements slow down, that the streets grow quiet, that the voices of the hurt be moderated and managed. But justice has never come dressed in timidity. Truth has never knocked gently at the door of power. Change is born not in stillness, but in disruption, righteous, loving, necessary disruption. History does not remember those who politely asked for justice to wait. It remembers those who loved enough to disturb the comfortable and challenge the unjust. The moderate fears tension, but tension is where transformation begins. The moderate fears the protest, but protest is the language of those who have been unheard. The moderate fears disruption, but disruption is how the world awakens. Those who sit on the sidelines, who urge calm while chaos reigns, must be reminded that the road to freedom was never paved with passivity. Their preference for peace over progress, for comfort over confrontation, may appear noble, but it quietly strangles the spirit of justice. The time has come to speak not only to the enemies of progress, but to those who claim to be its friends while standing in the way, to those who say, "I agree with your goal, but not your pace." We must respond with the urgency of a people who have waited too long. To those who say, "I support your rights, but not your resistance," we must show the sacred power of peaceful disruption. To those who believe justice can be scheduled like a meeting or postponed like a promise, we must proclaim that the human soul cannot be bound by timetables of convenience. The dream of freedom will not wait for approval from those who fear the discomfort of truth. There comes a time in the life of every nation, of every individual, when law and conscience must meet face to face. And when they do, it is not always law that carries the moral authority, for not all laws are just, not all systems are sacred, not all rules are righteous. There are laws that lift the soul, that reflect the highest ideals of human dignity, and there are laws that crush the very breath of justice. When a law uplifts the human spirit, when it seeks to protect the weak, empower the voiceless, and bring harmony among men, it is not only legal, it is moral. But when a law is used as a chain around the neck of the oppressed, when it is designed to preserve privilege and punish resistance, then it becomes not a pillar of society, but a weapon of suppression. There is a difference between legality and morality, and we must never confuse the two. It was legal to enslave, but it was never right. It was legal to deny women the right to vote, but it was never just. It was legal to enforce segregation, but it was never moral. The pages of history are filled with laws that were passed by parliaments and signed by presidents, yet rejected by the judgment of conscience. The law is a creation of man, and man is fallible. But conscience is a gift from God, the eternal flame that burns even when all else fails. And so, when the law commands us to do what conscience condemns, it is not only our right, it is our duty to break that law in the name of justice. Civil disobedience is not an act of anarchy, but an act of profound patriotism. It is not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It is a sacred protest against the misuse of power. Those who disobey unjust laws do not hate the law. They love justice too much to let the law remain defiled. They do not seek to destroy order. They seek to build a higher order rooted in compassion and fairness. They put their bodies, their reputations, even their freedom on the line, not to cause chaos, but to call forth the conscience of a sleeping society. It is an appeal to the better angels of our nature, a cry that says, "We will not be complicit. We will not be silent. We will not obey what is evil." When the law punishes a man for sitting at a lunch counter because of the color of his skin, when it arrests a woman for marching peacefully in the name of her rights, when it condemns the young for speaking truth in a public square, then obedience becomes betrayal, and disobedience becomes a form of grace. The prophets, the revolutionaries, the reformers, none of them found comfort in blind obedience. They chose the narrow road, the difficult path, the jail cell over the throne, the truth over popularity. They were scorned by their own time but celebrated by history, because they refused to bow to laws that defied love, that defied mercy, that defied the dream of a just world. Hope behind bars is not a contradiction. It is a revelation. For it is in the darkest cells, in the coldest corners of isolation, that the light of conviction burns the brightest. There, in the quiet of confinement, where chains rattle and steel doors echo, the soul speaks louder than the voices of oppression. A man behind bars, stripped of physical freedom, can still be more free than a society shackled by fear, apathy, or prejudice. For hope is not confined by stone or steel. It is not silenced by guards or gates. Hope sings in the heart of the unjustly imprisoned. It writes letters that shake nations. It whispers truth louder than the lies of tyrants. It dares to dream not despite the walls, but because of them, to sit in a jail cell, not as a criminal but as a crusader for justice, is to bear witness to a higher moral law. It is to declare without words that the dignity of the human spirit cannot be handcuffed, that conscience cannot be sentenced, that truth cannot be locked away. The bars may surround the body, but they cannot restrain the spirit that rises with every breath of righteous defiance. When hope lives behind bars, it becomes a testimony. It becomes a fire that kindles movements, that inspires marches, that strengthens those still walking free to walk boldly, and not grow weary. Prison becomes a pulpit. The silence becomes a sermon. The solitude becomes strength. From behind those walls, from the margins of society, from the places the powerful wish to forget, comes the unshakable witness of the oppressed who refuse to surrender their voice. They may write with trembling hands, but their words become swords. They may speak through the cracks in the wall, but their message thunders through history. Because when hope speaks from behind bars, it speaks with the authority of suffering, the power of purpose, and the courage of those who would rather be jailed for truth than walk freely in compromise. It is in these places of confinement that we are reminded what true freedom means. It is not the absence of struggle, it is not the comfort of safety, it is the presence of purpose, the clarity of mission, and the willingness to sacrifice for what is right. Those who sit behind bars because they dared to demand justice are not victims, they are visionaries. They are the heartbeat of every movement that ever dared to imagine a better world. And though the world may not see their suffering, though their names may be buried in footnotes and forgotten in headlines, their legacy breathes in the air of every liberty we now enjoy. Hope behind bars teaches us that walls are not limits but launch pads. That silence can speak louder than noise. That restraint can reveal more power than release. It reminds us that movements are not born in comfort. They are born in confinement, in resistance, in the unshaken will of those who choose faith over fear and justice over ease. In those cells, behind those bars, history is written not in ink but in endurance, not in slogans but in sacrifice, not in speeches but in the silent, unwavering decision to stand, even when seated in chains,